Hello and welcome to WomanVision TV. I'm your host, Nadia Giordano. My guest today, Dr. Susan Strauss, is a national and international speaker, trainer, investigator, and recognized expert on workplace and school harassment and bullying. She consults with organizations to assist them in their harassment and bullying prevention and intervention strategies. She's been featured on the television program 2020 and also the CBS Evening News, as well as other television and radio programs. She has a doctorate in organizational leadership and functions as an expert witness for harassment and bullying lawsuits in schools and in the workplace. I'll be talking to her in a two-part series. Today, in part one, we'll talk about sexual harassment in our schools. Hi Susan, welcome to the show today.
Hi Nadia, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great, and we're going to be talking about schools and sexual harassment in the schools, as I understand. And what I was thinking about, you wrote the book Sexual Harassment and Bullying, a guide to keeping our kids safe in schools. Is that the correct title?
It's Sexual Harassment and Bullying, a guide to keeping kids safe and holding schools accountable. So it deals with both sexual harassment, a little bit about other forms of harassment, as well as bullying in the schools.
What's the difference between bullying and sexual and other forms of harassment?
You know, that's a really good question, and it's one that gets asked frequently, and the two terms, harassment and bullying, are conflated quite frequently. And folks are confused about it, and they use the terms interchangeably, but there is a difference. Harassment of protected classes, which include sexual harassment, religious harassment, disability harassment, those are against civil rights law. There is no federal law currently against bullying in the schools. And even states' laws, let's see, the last I counted, I think it was 48 out of 50 states have anti-bullying laws for the schools, but they're ineffective, they're not actionable, which means that parents, for example, couldn't sue if they don't abide by the laws, so they don't carry nearly as much weight. There's also a difference between bullying and harassment, because harassment occurs because of the student's protected class. So in other words, because of their religion, their gender. Bullying occurs just because you don't like somebody, because you're annoyed with them. You don't like the way they wear their hair or their shoes. So there's quite a difference in the two forms of misconduct.
You know, I didn't really realize there was much of a difference. Just like a lot of people, it all gets combined in our mind. We don't understand what the differences are. Well, what are some of the common mistakes that schools make in not addressing the misconduct?
Well, the part of the mistake they make is that they're not knowledgeable enough about civil rights laws and Title IX, for example, which deals with sex equity in the schools, as well as some of the other civil rights laws dealing with harassment and discrimination of students based on their protected class. So that's one of the problems. And the other problem is we do not have a consistent definition of bullying. The other problem is that schools are not doing any training of their staff, bus drivers, administrators on harassment, only bullying. They're not training kids on it. And the other thing we see is that the individual who is tasked with conducting investigations doesn't know how. They've not been trained in it. So they don't even, if they do try to do an investigation, they use incorrect methodology, and they don't know how to differentiate if they do it, well, is this bullying or is it harassment? So all of those are some of the problems that occur in the schools.
Well, what can they do to prevent it?
Well, prevention and intervention are primary. Prevention, first of all, is they've got to have good quality policies in place that deal with bullying, but also deal with harassment of the different protected classes. The other thing that they must do is have a Title IX coordinator. That's required by law, that they have to have a Title IX coordinator. And that person needs to oversee any kind of gender equity, sex equity issues within the school district. That is a law. The other thing that they need to make sure they do is to conduct training of all teachers and staff and students, bus drivers, even their volunteers. I work as an expert witness for lawsuits, and one of the cases that I worked in, you can get sued individually for failure to abide by harassment in the schools. And even the lunch lady was being sued, and she was a volunteer because she had never been trained on what her role was as a volunteer if a student disclosed to her, in this case, that she was being sexually harassed. The lunch lady ignored it. So everybody needs to be trained in it, and then there needs to be firm discipline to make students accountable, but at the same time to use it as a teachable moment. Sometimes these are elementary children, they're just learning, so you've got to use it as a teachable moment. But you'd be amazed at the kind of harassment, sexual harassment that's occurring even on the elementary level. It includes sexual assault, which is amazing.
That really is, and I had no idea there was so much to that and so much that you need to know and address, like you say, even if you're a volunteer in the schools. Well, what should parents do to ensure that their kids are not victimized, or if they are, to ensure that the schools address it properly?
You know, that's a key question. And first of all, parents need to be acquainted with the differences between harassment and bullying. So they need to educate themselves. They need to be a catalyst within the school district for the school district to make sure that they have created and implemented adequate, comprehensive policies. They need to make sure the school conducts training of all their staff and of their students. And they need to, if their student has been bullied or harassed, they need to use the policy that exists within the school district and make the school accountable for what the policy says the school needs to do, one of which is to conduct an investigation. So parents also need to be aware that so many folks within the district are not competent in conducting investigations. So if they are saying, I want an investigation, to demand that there is a competent investigator that does the investigation as well, and then that the school has to take all reasonable steps possible to stop the harassment. So parents need to sometimes monitor that the school is monitoring the situation, because the school, once they discipline a child, needs to monitor and make sure that there's no retaliation and that the harassment or the bullying has not begun again.
So much important information to get out. Susan, before we go, tell the viewers again a little bit more about your book and your website.
Okay, thank you. The book, again, is Sexual Harassment and Bullying, a guide for keeping kids safe and holding schools accountable. It's written primarily for parents and youth advocates, but it's also going to be very appropriate for schools. It talks about the differences between harassment and bullying. It's geared primarily for sexual harassment, also harassment of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered students, and it tells parents what it is they should do, and it tells schools what schools should be doing as well. It covers cyberbullying and cyber harassment, and it's just a wonderful all-around resource for parents as well as for schools. You can get it on Amazon, and you can go to my website. My website is straussconsulting.net.
That's it for today. You're watching WomanVision TV. I'm your host, Nadia Jordana. Until next time.